How is everybody today? Are we ready to get back to nature? Are we ready to find our inner forest self? Different topic today. So we talk a lot about, we've talked about vaccines, we've talked about hormones, we've talked about mood lately, and today we're going to get back to nature. So thanks for joining me. I'm Sarah Hiner, and I will give you my always reminders about everything that we got going. We've got a growing list of videos and these interviews that we've done. You can see them in Facebook in our video library, or you can actually go to YouTube, where I've got hundreds and hundreds of videos that I've been doing over the years, great interviews with people like Dr. John Puma, who we're going to be talking to in just a minute. And subscribe to it. There's all sorts of stuff. See what you can find. Tell your friends about it. Share it. Would be awesome. I'm doing next Thursday. I can't remember what I'm doing next Thursday, but come back next Thursday and visit with me again. There will be links in the download, in the chat box, as always. Immunity, please, please, please. The country is opening up. Vaccines are going out there. Nobody is talking about immunity, strengthening your immune system. And our bodies know how to heal ourselves. Our bodies know how to protect ourselves. So while you socially distance, while you wear your masks, while you get your vaccines, please download. We've got a free download about immunity and strengthening your immune system. So that's really important. We also have another free download about pain. I don't know about you, sitting around too much, a little achy breaky. So we also have strategies for reducing pain. Those are free. Share them with your friends, share them with your family, share them on your social media. Honest to God, this is kind of my mission and passion, is to help people feel better. And with that, if you have comments, questions about what we're talking about today, which is this thing called nature deficit disorder. It's not in the insurance, so you can't go get insurance on it. But it's a thing, and we're going to talk about that and how important it is. And so put comments, questions for Dr. Puma in the chat box, and someone will send them along to me. And they reminded me next week is Ray Higdon, and I'm talking about fear and overcoming your fears. A lot of people, as the world is opening up, they're still scared. They're afraid to come out. There's a lot of headlines today about what did Texas and Mississippi make a mistake because how frightening is it is, and what if germs are still coming on? So how do we overcome our fears with regard to health and with regard to the rest of our lives? What's holding us back? So that's next week. Right now, let me introduce you to Dr. John Puma, friend of Bottom Lines. We've known him for years. Hi, John. Great to see you.
Hey, Sarah. Great to be here.
All right. Let me tell everybody how great you are. So funny. I put together the bio. I always say that I have to read it all. And I said to John, is there anything that's on that needs to come off? Because it's so long. And I said, you've done so many great things. I have to share it. So here you go. Here's who I'm talking to today. He is a board certified, internationally known doctor of internal medicine. He has co-founded Chef MD, a Freddie Award-winning health media brand promoting culinary medicine. And he co-taught the first nutrition and cooking course at a US medical school with Dr. Michael Roizen. I don't know if anyone knows how little doctors actually know about health, quality food, and nutrition, but there's a lot they don't know. And John took that actually to the medical school community to help these doctors learn how to cook and learn how to understand and appreciate good food. It was huge. He's also the New York Times bestselling author of Refuel and Chef MD, Big Book of Culinary Medicine. John is also the co-author of Real Age Diet and Cooking the Real Age Way. And he's the founder of Plant with a Doc, a successful nature-based stress management and burnout reversal program for office workers. Anyone have that? Well, we're not in offices, but there's certainly got to be a lot of burnout going on right now. Author of Paging Dr. Puma blog, which you can find on his website. And he's working on a new book that's going to be coming out later this year called Eco Medicine. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, eco medicine, and the fueling ourselves with nature and the actual medicine of nature. You can learn more about that and what John's doing at ecomedicine.org. So hello again officially, now that I've introduced all your greatness.
You're very kind, Sarah.
Well, you're very good.
And I am looking on a book on eco medicine, but no, it's not coming out quite yet, or this year. We're still looking for the right partner to publish it. But it's a concept that I hope we'll talk about today, because I think it can help a lot of people in finding the balance for how they live and how to help the planet as they live.
And we will. We're going to get to. We're going to get to that. We're going to work our way all the way through it. So first and foremost, we made a. There's this phrase. It's not in the insurance companies. No one can collect, copay for it. But nature deficit disorder. So can you define what that means? I'm sure that everybody's going to go, well, yeah, kind of. Obviously, but there's a serious aspect to it.
Richard Louv, who's a journalist and a leader in nature therapy, defined this in 2005 in his book, Last Child in the Woods, for children as a social problem with so little nature that they develop social and interpersonal problems. But I think so little nature can result in medical problems too. So I think nature deficit disorder is so little nature connection that it actually creates medical problems for you that also can be treated and even reversed with restoring that nature connection.
So it's interesting, that you talk about the medical problems for children. Like we know children have to be outside and playing, but that these are the other issues or social issues that children have as a result of not being outside. I understand not being with their kids, but what's the outside connection for, John?
Well, for a lot of people, it's because we have a native, kind of a biophilic attraction to nature. And when we're not outside, a lot of bad things happen. We tend to stay inside and become addicted to screens, which many of us are. We tend to lose the kind of perspective that we get when we feel like we're part of something bigger. And we our worlds get smaller. We don't remember that there's something much bigger outside of our apartment walls. And that can result in not just depression and anxiety, but increased risks of diabetes and heart disease and visual disturbances. And so it's become kind of a under-noticed cause of what has been ongoing so much during the pandemic. And actually the pandemic, as you know, has made it worse. The global warming, the pandemic have showed us that our personal medical health, how we feel, often these days anxious and depressed and in need of care, and how our personal health and the health of the planet are actually two sides of the same coin. Many people haven't thought of it quite that way, but I think that's what makes the most sense.
So it's interesting. Do you have, I think there's the part of it that's like, duh, nature's good for you, right? And yet we kind of accept living inside. I mean, can you give a few stats? You and I talked the other day, 93% of retirees spend their time, 93% of a retiree's time is spent inside, which is on the one hand, not surprising. And on the other hand, a shocking amount when you think about, what we're doing and how we're spending our time. So could you give a little bit like the trends of what's happened 20 years ago, 50 years ago? What were we doing? How are we spending our time now?
Well, then,
thanks to the screens we're sitting in front of. And
right. Well, when the country started, only 5% of us lived in cities, and now 80% of us live in cities. And as we have gone and moved kind of as a huge human migration to cities, we have kind of farmed out, quite literally, the greenery and the water from what used to be nature, a nature setting, outside of the city. And in fact, as you know, in urban planning, there's a movement to infill housing to try to pack housing as densely as you can, because it's a more efficient use of space. But I think that doesn't take into account public health, where it's been clearly shown in many population studies that having greater tree canopies and more shade and more greenery and water elements dramatically changes the health of populations, as well as violent crime and other sorts of crime as well. So that 93% breaks down, by the way, into 86% in buildings and 7% in cars. And those are pre-pandemic numbers. So
now it's got to be, even higher.
Now it's got to be crazy. And for people who are not retired, well over 90% of our time is spent inside. And that's a really scary statistic. For kids, you mentioned kids, kids only spend about 13 minutes a day on vigorous outdoor activity as opposed to about 10 and a half hours remaining inside and not playing. Like this data are something like between 4 and 7 minutes outdoors for every 7 to 8 hours on electronics.
That's so funny. And even in recent years, I mean, again, pre-pandemic, there were a lot of schools that were cutting recess time.
Right.
Because they were insisting on all sorts of other, super academic or multilingual things or whatever other stuff they wanted to do. And they were totally, I mean, between the nature aspect of it, the movement aspect of it for kids, and how much also, John, you're talking about urban issues, is just personal space, where offices have shrunk the amount of space where people, the benching and cubes and stuff, versus the need, like, is space part of this, that we all need a little bit of space around us?
We do, but you can get a lot of nature inside of even a 300 square foot apartment. And you can experience the joy of running water, which is a sound that is almost universally enjoyed, even in a shower. I mean, there are a lot of things on a spectrum of enjoyment of nature and connection to nature that not only don't exclude people who don't have access to the back 40, which you don't need, of course, or to a farm like the one I live on, but you need just the presence of greenery and the presence of those sounds and the possibility of touching, using your senses with them. That's kind of the secret to nature. You get to use your senses with it. And, that means you see it, you hear it, you touch it, you smell it, and you even taste it, especially high anti-inflammatory foods, which we'll talk about as well. And those, if you cue in on your senses, you automatically experience a different side of your brain, and it gives the rest of your brain a rest so that you can use that experience to lower your stress level and lower your blood pressure and lower your pulse. And there are very specific ways and locations to do that with.
So it's really interesting. Again, there's kind of like the nature's good for you, and there's obviously the huge climate movement. And I always think about that as like most of what I hear on that is cranial. That we want to reduce our carbon emissions. We want to be able to, but this is a whole other aspect of it, which is actually, I don't hear a lot of the climate movement talking about the living it and the connection and the health benefits and the gestalt of nature and us as, as carbon beings as part of that and the continuation of it.
A lot of people think that, you have to go out to be part of nature. You really already are a part of nature. We're all animals, and as such, we're part of nature. The climate change folks, I think, have not yet had really good marketing people help them to try to understand how to communicate the benefits of living clean and the very simple things you can do to actually have an effect. A lot of people feel like climate change is so huge, how am I going to affect it? And the answer is, a simple answer is don't waste food, go outdoors and grow something.
Yeah.
I mean, wasting food, most food waste comes from household food waste. It ends up in landfills, which produces bad gases. And it's because people don't know what to do with the food that they have or how to cook it or prepare it. And we tend to overbuy over-processed foods. So not wasting foods is actually a big, all along that chain of how those foods got to you if you didn't grow it, then changes that chain so that there are fewer carbon emissions along the way. Grow something yourself, I'm a big fan of. I think gardening is self-care and wellness, and can bring to you not just purpose, but also beauty and food, of course, as well as reduce your produce costs. And going outside and cycling through your senses, which I mentioned before, for just 5 minutes, resets your cortisol level and allows you to engage your parasympathetic nervous system and not pay attention to notifications all the time. Those three things actually can make a big dent in personal influence of climate change.
Yeah, and I will cycle back to some of the things that people can do to increase their, or to offset their nature deficit. Let's talk, so I'm going to quote something. We did an article with you recently, and I'm going to quote you from our article.
Thank you.
which I think gives a really important perspective. You mentioned a number of the health implications of I'll call it starving for nature, but I'm going to quote it. Nature can be your medicine here too. Here are some medical conditions that spending time in nature has been shown to improve acute. I should be able to type better and read better. Start thinking. Here are some medical conditions that spending time in nature has been shown to improve: acute urinary tract infections, anxiety disorder, ADHD, cancer, cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, surgical healing, musculoskeletal complaints and aches and pains, migraines, upper respiratory tract infections, and vertigo. I mean, across the board, everything. Now, it's easy to say nature can calm my anxiety or my depression. That makes sense. It's easy to say, for years, years ago, they would send the city kids out to the country to help their asthma and their breathing and all of that. Urinary tract infections?
It's really striking. There are about 2,500 papers in the medical literature about nature and its effect on mental and physical health. And the kinds of, and the evidence ranges from case studies to population studies, as well as randomized double-blind controlled studies. A UTI, that data comes from a study of 345,000 patients in the Netherlands, of 190 physicians who completed assessments of their patients in medical problems from their zip code. That is, everybody who lived within a kilometer, 5/8 of a mile of greenness with a dense green canopy nearby, trees around your house, within half a mile, a little over half a mile, were assessed for what medical status they had and medical problems, and acute urinary tract infection fell out as one of the problems that people had less when they lived closer to greater greenery. Now, why would that be? Why would, acute UTI be less prevalent among people who have more greenery around them? When you factor out
studies, so it wasn't causative. It was that there was an
it's associative.
Living near more trees and a lower incidence of
right. But the same actually has been shown for antidepressant prescriptions,
right,
through the UK NHS in very persuasive manners. So much so that that gardening allotments are actually part of the national health system in ways that are meaningful, and there's competition for them. There's a lot of population-based health studies showing that dense green canopy can change the way that your body works. I have a friend in Louisville, Aruni Bhatnagar, who's a professor of cardiology there, who persuaded the NIH, among others, to fund a $14 million project over the next 5 years, now the next 4 years, in Southwest Louisville, where he has imported hundreds of 30-foot canopy trees to plant in the poorest parts of Louisville, so that he can change the physical environment and see whether cholesterol goes down, triglycerides go down, blood pressures go down, hospitalizations for atherosclerotic and vascular problems, heart disease, and stroke go down, whether it changes medication and office use. And there's a lot of data to suggest, including an early pilot study, that actually will happen. That by providing shade, reducing heat, providing a connection to the senses that I just mentioned, that it acts not just as a wellness intervention and as part of providing some motivation and routine in self-care, where people go for walks deliberately now because there's something beautiful instead of something desolate. It actually might be as powerful, Aruni thinks, as statins in preventing heart disease.
Wow.
And actually, he's a spokesperson for the American College of Cardiology, although I don't know if he said that in that capacity. I know he believes it. So
fascinating to me.
Yeah.
These are all, it's really passive. I mean, usually when you say, how do you offset it? And we're going to talk about some specific things that people can do proactively and really specifically. But this is actually a really passive impact. I mean, I know everybody knows I love being in Colorado. I love being in the mountains and the space, and that's kind of my happy place. I've written about it. Having that kind of grounds me.
Yeah.
But that's a conscious effort that I do. But what you're talking about here is just a total passive. Probably people don't even realize it. Like, are they even conscious of their lack of greenery? Or when they put the trees in, are they even conscious of that something changed, in the set, you know what I mean? Like, I just think that's really exciting to have that big of a health benefit in a very passive way. It's not like you have to exercise 30 minutes a day, or you have to, stop eating your ice cream. This is just a very easy, passive, accessible concept that has huge health implications.
Thank you. I think, it's a lot easier to change your environment than it is to change your mind. It's a way to, and this is true, as you just alluded to, for dieting as well. When you want to lose weight, or if you want to achieve a medical goal with food, you can plan out your meals and put them in Tupperware containers and stick to a regimen and feel good because you're improving in whatever way you are, often weight loss. But unless you make it part of your routine where it has both purpose and meaning and it's fun, it's often something that you kind of slide back with. But if you prepare everything around you to support that decision, it's not just a cognitive decision, it's an environmental one, then you can make it becomes part, again, of self-care and of wellness and of being able to get up in the morning and know who you are and where you're going, having purpose. And for Colorado, spending time in nature reduces your brain's fatigue and stress. It reduces activity in the prefrontal cortex, which is the center for rumination or obsessing about things. And this has been demonstrated in MRI studies at Stanford and elsewhere now that show that walking in a meadow or in a forest is dramatically different than walking down a street, even a really nice street with trees in it, because it changes the way that the brain works.
Well, and how important is the quiet in that? You walk down a lovely street in New York City and there's still a cacophony of, noises and sirens. You're talking about, hearing and, the different senses versus the sound of silence, right?
Right. I think there is something beautiful to silence. I also actually, I lived in Chicago a long time. I loved Chicago. I love the urban sounds. You get used to it after a while, you kind of go with it. But I think when you get outside Chicago in the northwestern suburbs or in the northern suburbs or even the western suburbs, you get to a place where all of a sudden you're in a completely different environment and you feel rested. And I think that's what nature does for people. It kind of allows them to feel differently, even differently than they can imagine. The data that we talked about before for kids and free play is very important. In Singapore, they have a public health campaign where they don't want them to stay in the city. It's important to have free play outside for 2 hours a day with their parents because they want to reverse the myopia that is epidemic in Asia and is actually becoming epidemic in the United States. And, myopia, you think, well, you just wear glasses or take eye drops, but that's not, 4% of myopia actually causes blindness. It's called high myopia, and it's more common than you think. And kids also have lower levels of asthma, as you said, lower levels of blood pressure, and less insulin resistance when they live in greener areas. So you can create that for your kids and for your family if you're deliberate about it, if you have purpose about it. And I think more people will.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask an obvious question, which we've kind of already answered, which is how important is it for healthy child development to have them outside in nature and away from the screens and the freedom and the smells? I always joke that I grew up in the malls of New Jersey, and nature is kind of an acquired trait for me, an acquired thing, and I love it and I found it. But I've never been as comfortable in it naturally as my husband, who grew up in Colorado and he grew up in the mountains, and that was part of him. And our daughters, we've also raised far more in nature than I was, and they are all so comfortable in it. I remember going hiking with my daughter. They got to a camp that was very outdoorsy, and I'd never hiked with been on the trail with her. And we went hiking before we brought her to camp, and her whole body literally changed.
Yeah.
The minute she set foot on the trail, it was
Yeah.
remarkable,
I,
remarkable for me. So
I find it remarkable too. And I think kids are especially influenced by nature. It is something, I mean, it's not as if it's like other things in that you can learn it as you get older. But if you get it when you're young, it's like riding a bicycle. You have a memory of it. We have a new quiz called What's Your Comfort Nature, which is what's your place in nature that acts like a comfort food. Like people have a comfort food. They know that when they eat Doritos or a specific chocolate ice cream, they feel relaxed, or they feel sated, or they feel loved or hugged. Is there a place in nature like that for you? Often people recall a place from childhood, but we created a quiz that we're going to launch later this month to help people identify it, because sometimes it's too remote and people don't quite get it. But when they do get it, you can bring it to your mind, even if you can't go there physically, and cycle through your senses in the way that I described. And it does bring you peace, even away from it. Um, kids are powerfully affected by nature, and kids with ADHD, nature therapy is kind of a treatment. There's kids with ADHD concentrate better after a walk in the park than after a downtown walk or a neighborhood walk. And these are substantial, and actually it works as well as some formulations of Ritalin. Um, and this is recent data published in a peer-reviewed journal from Sage.
and how important is nature for longevity? I noticed that, I think, the 5 top blue zones, I was just quickly looking last night, are all kind of tropical or subtropical. They're all kind of outdoor kind of places, beautiful weather, warm weather,
Right.
not in areas.
Yeah.
Are there research and correlations between more nature and longevity?
There are. I mean, that you mentioned the blue zones. That's Dan Buettner's brilliant concept, where he now has 4 New York Times bestselling books about them, which I recommend, along with our own real age books about longevity. I mean, his other principles, he has the Power 9 principles that he's derived from studying these 5 blue zone areas, which have both maximum or optimum longevity and quality of life. His other 3 of them move naturally. People in Sardinia and Costa Rica and Icaria don't go to health clubs. They garden.
Right.
They go to each other's house. They walk to the forest or the beach or to the store.
They don't call Uber?
Drive, right. And they don't call Uber.
No Uber.
Maybe in Loma Linda they call Uber. But out of the 4 out of the 5, I don't think they call Uber. I mean, and they eat whole anti-inflammatory foods that are often gathered and that they make teas of. They often drink herbal teas all day long. And the herbal teas that they drink are not like, you get from Celestial Seasonings or somebody. They're wild herbs that are picked, which often have insulin sensitizing properties or anti-lipid properties that are subtle because it's an herb and not a medication or a pharmaceutical,
Right.
but nevertheless are bioactive. And because they're weeds, often we would think of them as weeds, they've had to develop really strong protective mechanisms from predators that would otherwise eat them or chew on them or others. And you actually get those protective mechanisms when you yourself gather them and make a tea of them. And then finally, his 3rd principle that I think it answers your question is social interaction. A big benefit of nature is actually running into other people who are doing the same thing, like gardening or like water activities or water sports or hiking. You run into other people when you walk your dog. And so the dogs play. You're not playing quite as much as the dog is playing because the dog likes to play. And you like to talk to the other people sometimes. And you can't do that when you're inside.
Yeah.
So these 3 things, 3 of his 9 power principles, important in longevity, also don't come up without nature. They're move naturally, eat whole anti-inflammatory foods, and socialize when you go outside. And those things are powerful because you want to live not just longer, but better at higher quality levels with greater well-being. And I think I know Dan believes that. And I know that's what the Blue Zone concept is.
Right. So now I think again, I keep going back and forth because it's kind of obvious to say, go hiking, it feels good and it's natural and it's healing and all that sort of stuff, like kind of duh. But I think it's so striking that one of those early studies about the gallbladder surgery, that this is not about you have to go to the mountains or you have to go to Sardinia.
Right.
That I think that's a really powerful demonstration of the impact of and places where people will talk next about how people can bring nature to their lives. So we'll talk about that study.
You're referring to Roger Ulrich's study published in 1984 in Science magazine, in which he studied people who had had cholecystectomies, their gallbladders out in a hospital in Pennsylvania. And in 1984, you had to go to the hospital to get your gallbladder out. You couldn't do it as an outpatient or through a flexible scope.
And you were there for a week.
You were there for a week.
Out of work
right. That's exactly. You were there for a month?
I was out of work for a month. People have known, like I didn't used to be this healthy being. And I had my gallbladder out. I was 23 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And
well, I'm glad you're healthy now. And that's quite good for you for surviving that hospitalization.
It kicked my butt, but I was in the hospital for a week and home for a month. And now it's outpatient surgery. It's really phenomenal. Nonetheless.
Yeah, it is phenomenal.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, because you were there, you stayed in the hospital for a week. And so what he did was find people like you on either side of a hospital ward that is on two sides of the ward, so that one side had a view of trees out a window and one side had a view of a brick wall, really literally out a window, and followed them in their course over 3 years, reviewing records from that time. So there's a retrospective study, interestingly, and it's been cited over 5,000 times, which is really interesting because they tell you in scientific research, try not to do retrospective studies because you don't learn as much. But in this case, it influenced hospital design. It influenced the way that nature is thought of in hospitals, because the people who had the view of trees had less opioid medication, stayed in the hospital 0.8 days less, had a better hospital experience. The nurses thought they had a better hospital experience and had less pain overall than the people who had the view of the brick wall. Hospitals are kind of the original places for therapeutic gardens. Hospital gardens have been around for millennia. And they used to just supply medication to the formulary for patients in the hospital. And then the ones that survived became places of solace and retreat and restoration, primarily for the staff who are really stressed in hospitals. And not enough hospital gardens still exist. I collaborated with NBBJ, the great architectural firm, on designing one for Loma Linda, which I don't think yet has been green lighted. But the idea was to create gardens that were cardiovascular and pediatric and immune gardens that contained those plants that were good for treating those diseases, in which kids could also play, and where staff could also relax. And plants have a powerful therapeutic effect in the hospital, but are underutilized because hospital administrators primarily are afraid of infection. But they actually have a therapeutic value that extends well beyond the kind of remote possibility of bringing in a bug. Maybe you don't want to bring them in with somebody who has a white count of 0 or low white counts, but and it's already severely immune compromised. But it's been really clearly demonstrated, including our own study of using VR with nature, that is virtual reality with nature, where you look at the sky and you look at the beach and then you swim with the fish when you're getting a flu shot. We did this as a randomized controlled study with kids who were getting flu shots. And we found that their fear, their pain, and their anxiety about having a flu shot were cut in half. Their parents, who we gave questionnaires to as well, thought the same thing or even more so. And the staff loved it and made clinic go faster. And now it's actually changed practice in our community, where every kid is offered a VR of virtual reality of nature swimming under the sea before they get a shot.
Have they tested to see the impact on the antibodies and the reaction to the shot afterward? Are they more receptive in the immune system?
That's a great question. I don't think so, but we'd love to have the funding to do that.
Put it on your list.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about some of these things. I mean, I just think that's so amazing. And I know that they did redesign, changed, as you mentioned, the architecture of hospitals so that people can see out. And honestly, I was in a New York City hospital and I was on the inside. I looked at nothing but institution green the whole time. And it hurt.
Yeah, I can see. But there's been more and more progress. I think that has to be, architects especially are really mindful of that. They want to bring the outside in. And actually people can do that as well in your own apartment or in your own house. Greening the walls of your house, greening the paint and the carpet and the air. A lot of people don't know that indoor air quality is not as good, generally speaking, as outdoor air quality. And indoor air pollutants are actually, like up to 5 times greater than what you'd encounter indoors. And since we spend so much time indoors, the risk of illness increases. So we want really to bring the outside in, and whenever we can, go outside as well.
All right, so let's start with how people can, I mean, I think, well, I mean, I'll call it, it's easy and obvious to tell people to get off the screens and get out. And I don't know if there's a prescription for how long people should be outside. I think kids are supposed to be out, I'll call it hours a day.
2 hours a day,
right.
to reverse or slow myopia. And this is true actually, even my myopia corrected as well. And it might be because I've been working so much on the outside on the farm, or it might be because my diet is pretty anti-inflammatory, but whatever it is, I don't have to wear glasses to drive anymore. And that's just lucky probably, but it also might be that I actually practice what I preach.
Right.
Um,
So let's talk about how people can bring nature into themselves. Although again, we're going to talk about this, but get out.
Well, I think the easiest way is with houseplants. And there was a great segment on Access Daily yesterday with Mario Lopez and Maria Feya, who's a houseplant doyen in New York City, who described plant parents as either design focused or nurture focused, and suggested snake plants and monsterosa plants for each, and taught Mario that he actually has more potential as a plant parent than he thought, whereby he thinks he really only likes plastic plants. And plastic plants have a place. They're kind of a threshold drug.
Well, I was going to ask you if a plastic plant, because if virtual reality is working,
absolutely,
can
I think it's
plants and plastic plants work? Because honestly, I have a brown thumb, and I always joke that if there's a plant in my house, it's my husband's responsibility. If there's a plant out, I'm on God. God didn't create house plants; He created outside plants.
I wonder what God would say about that. But I think that having houseplants is a really easy way. I can't believe the lines at the Santa Barbara Farmers Market on Saturday for Chris of Santa Ynez Gardens, who runs a house plant stand that plants that need very little care, that are potted. And I think it's a great way to start. Houseplants need, depending on their size, a few ice cubes of water every other week. And most of them do not need a lot of fertilizer. They just need a little attention, which really means just paying attention to them. We gave houseplants in our burnout program, a burnout reversal program, to office workers as ways to take care of them. And some people loved it. Some people didn't love it because they thought they were worried that they weren't nourished enough. But just having something green to look at, to touch, to smell if it's fragrant, to some people listen to their plants, other people name their plants. We ask people to name plants in our burnout prevention study, because you form a bond with it and you remember that you're part of something greater.
Well, it's funny, actually. I think we've reported on studies where seniors living alone, people living alone, even if it's a houseplant, something, be a pet, a houseplant, a goldfish, anything to care for, increases their longevity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The aquarium doctor's offices are there not just for beauty, but because they actually lower blood pressure. Getting your hands in the soil exposes you to a mycobacteria called Mycobacteria vacci, which has been shown to increase serotonin levels in the brain and improve your microbiome as you do. So there are, and that bacteria is well known. It's increasingly studied in animals. There are some human studies in progress. And a lot of people identify with the idea that having your hands in the dirt feels good. For other people, it feels awful that there are bugs and literally trillions of bacteria in every tablespoon. And that seems like too much. But it's gradual. I think if you have a houseplant, you develop a relationship with it, you don't kill it, you begin to wonder, okay, I can do this. Is there something else I can do? And that's when, a year later, you're buying plants on Amazon at 12:30 at night.
And how about things as simple as like literally opening the window, fresh air, because as you said, there's a lot of toxins inside, so many things gassing off, plastics and whatever's. So important.
I keep the windows open whenever we can. Of course, you can't always. If it's snowing outside, it's too hard to keep the windows open for most people. But I like having fresh air in the house. That's an important part of ventilation, particularly that, if you have windows that open up and down, the top part of it is the best part to keep open.
Yeah. And then you talk about, you're talking about the multisensory, smell, hearing. You talk about essential oils. You talked about apps that have nature noises.
Yeah. I like YouTube as an app for nature noises. You can find almost anything and cycle through it, and including channels just for sleep, for relaxation, for for specific locations. There's another app called Atmosphere that has 8 different environments like beach or city or park or countryside or underwater. And those sounds you can experiment with and find how they make you feel. There's a whole nother part of ecomedicine, which is called soundscapes, where people use walls of sound and particular types of sound for specific kinds of healing, which is fascinating stuff that I don't know a lot about, but I want to learn more about.
But you will, and it will be in your book.
Yeah, probably will. Hope so.
And is it like with the sounds or with the smells, is it, I'll call it all good, and whatever smell makes me feel good, or whatever sound, some people, like you talked about the ocean before, but if I like the tropical rainforest, or somebody else likes, wind blowing, is it whatever strikes your fancy that touches you?
In a general sense, yes. In a specific sense, no. The specifics are more that, plants give off chemicals called phytoncides, which are called they're antimicrobial volatile organic compounds. And they use those scents to communicate with other plants. And they increase those compounds that are aromatic when they're threatened, or when someone is crunching on them, or they're not getting enough moisture or nutrient. Plants are responsive to their environment, both in the soil and in the air. But those phytoncides are not just for communication between plants. They also have human effects. They reduce blood pressure. They change autonomic activity, the fight and flight response that you have. And they actually change your immune system. You mentioned this at the top of the hour, that the immune system is responsive to particular phytoncides. The best data come from Japanese cypress studies, where, and in Japan, Shinrin-yoku, which is the 1982 term coined by Dr. Lee for forest bathing, was identified. And he did most of his studies in Japanese cypress groves, where specific phytoncides, these aromatic pine-smelling chemicals emitted by trees, improve natural killer cell concentration, improve immune function, balance immune function in both men and women after a couple of hour walk in a forest at no speed whatsoever, a quarter mile in 2 hours. And that effect of increased natural killer cells lasts for a month thereafter. And this data is not disputed at all, but there's some question about whether it's just specific to the Japanese cypress, or if other trees can produce the same effect. Lavender actually, works in a specific part of the hippocampus in the brain to cause relaxation. And each of the aromatherapy chemicals that come from plants do the same. They work in a specific part of the brain. So to achieve different sensual effects, different wellness effects, if you will, I think different aromatic VOCs, different phytoncides are needed.
Right.
But if you're just trying to feel better, I mean, I like vanilla and cinnamon, even though cinnamon's spicy and kind of ramps you up a little bit, and vanilla is relaxing. But the idea is that there's a whole science behind this that's actually unexplored and not taken seriously by most of allopathic medicine, but I think deserves a better shake.
Yes. No, I know traditional medicine, natural medicine actually is big on that. And, I was just, again, trying to get people to at least understand like it a little, just you're touching nature. There's so many ways and possibilities
Sure.
to touch nature. So talk about forest bathing for a second, because these are, so, in some, and what we've talked about now, a lot of these things, whether you're rural, suburban, or urban, these are ways if you're urban and a little bit landlocked or dry locked, that you can bring nature in to your everyday life. But talk about forest bathing, because it's a very big thing for you. I know you're a big fan of it, and there's a lot that's out there.
I am a fan because it's so harmless and so powerful. You do need a forest.
How big a forest do I need? Can it be?
I think it can be any forest, because these parts have been done. These studies have been done in all kinds of forests, where you find where other markers of inflammation have been lowered, in interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor, by simply spending a couple of hours in a forest and cycling through your senses in the way that I mentioned. That is, your eyes and your ears and your smells, and even tasting a tea that you might brew. And there are forest bathing guides.
Go ahead. I said forest bathing is not hiking.
No,
An hour
hiking is cool too.
Forest during hiking, but this is a very kind of, it's almost meditative.
It's a walk in the forest that's slow and contemplative, where you have time to think about, you feel really your surroundings, not think about them, and use the parasympathetic part of your brain where you're tuned into how your senses, instead of ticking off notifications about what you ought to be able to do next and making lists and stuff. What you're doing is sitting or simply being in a forest or walking, so that you can immerse yourself in nature and change your hormone levels, including.
So can I forest bathe in Central Park?
Sure.
Can I forest bathe in the dunes at a beach?
No, because I didn't think they have a forest.
I wasn't sure if it was nature, like, is it the forest or the pines, or was it, again, is it the process of slowing down, and I'll call it almost meditating in nature?
Yeah.
Versus, where
the
beach has different sensory experiences than the forest.
It's certainly a meditative type of walk, but I think the forest adds an aspect to it that the beach doesn't have. Although the sounds of water, as I alluded to at the top of the hour, are themselves universally appreciated, and actually there's been a lot done with water and rehabilitation and post-traumatic stress disorder, and particularly for veterans returning from war who have had PTSD, and up to 30% do. But that requires, a body of water and movement of the water.
Can I forest bathe on YouTube on my big screen TV?
No, but you can achieve even viewing nature posters, and the same thing about viewing nature on a screen does change hormone levels. It does induce a relaxation. When I have people do this, I ask them to turn their device to airplane mode, not off, just to airplane mode, because what you're doing is you're trying to get yourself out of the react and respond mode, and just feel or see what's in front of you. The mantra of "be here now" applies to looking just at a nature poster as well. And I don't know why nature posters aren't in every medical office in America. They have a calming effect that reduces blood pressure and pulse in several different studies. They're very inexpensive, and everybody likes them. Yeah. Why wouldn't you do it?
So one great thing I think about the pandemic has been that it seems there's been a trend. Like, on the one hand, we've been inside a lot more, but on the other hand, we've actually been outside a lot more. You couldn't get a bicycle to save your life over the summer. You can't buy cross-country skis to save your life. I mean, that people have really gone outside, which has been great. RVs, hiking, camping, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You think it's going to stick when the country opens up?
I do. I mean, I think the same has been true in gardening and
Mhm.
in nurseries,
Yeah.
that they're, they've had to add lots of staff, at least
Mhm.
here. People have, the seed catalogs are actually out of things this early,
Right.
which is amazing. You go into a nursery and anything that is either very low care, like succulents or snake plants or monsterosa, uh, or is fruit or vegetable bearing, is already getting snapped up. Those are the things that are going first.
Right.
And in a way, it's great. I mean, those guys for years, maybe even decades, have labored under only the, people kind of looking at the edges and deciding whether to get a 6-pack of tomatoes to take home,
Right.
or for dedicated gardeners who have their catalogs out in October and have got their orders in by October 15th for really specialized varieties. And the reason I know that is because I myself have that disease. But but it, I think that this is kind of a new awakening for America, where people want to be more self-sufficient again,
Mhm.
know that they can't rely on the idiocy of having to dump milk in the streets and dump unused vegetables in the streets during the first parts of the pandemic, while we have food insecurity is at its highest level in decades now. That's just crazy. And I think people don't want to be caught in that dilemma anymore.
Right.
And so having your own garden, growing something yourself, knowing the people who grow things yourself, being able to um, get around yourself and not rely on transportation or on others that you might be exposed to disease with, enjoying the outdoors because it's there, is, for some people who are already clued in, is a natural, sure, I'm going to do that way more. For the 50 million Americans, that's like, a seventh of the population that are sedentary, are stuck inside their homes, are afraid to go outside often, and feel like there might be something, that will injure them. It's going to be, people are going to need something, need bridges to get to the idea that the outside actually can be healthier than the inside.
Well, and just a reminder, I mean, people, you're not getting sick walking around the block. You're not getting sick in a breeze. People are getting sick when you're in enclosed places with a lot of people.
Right.
So being outside, you're not going to get sick. Step out of your doors. All right, give me one quick minute on eco-medicine and what your book's going to be.
Ecomedicine is the medical field that encompasses what people do outside already. But the practical application of it is that everybody can have a wellness practice of what I've just been talking about: self-reliant self-care, which helps them heal by finding and restoring their nature connection, whether that's gardening and houseplants or forest bathing or surf therapy. And when that activity pays attention to how they affect, when that activity is not just for them, but also is for the planet, how it affects the planet when they're outside. So ecomedicine takes into account how you can get well with nature and how you can help the planet get well with it as well by being in it as well. And I think that's a new conception of it, because it's one thing to say, okay, eat this, not that, or sleep 8 hours and get up refreshed. And exercise 30 minutes a day at high intensity intervals if you can do it. It's another thing to say, okay, I'm taking care of myself, but I also want to take care of the planet, which has been very good to us. But we have extracted so much from it that it's suffering and it's in many ways dying. So we have to revive it by being outside, I think, by engaging with it and seeing what we might miss if we let it go, and that we ourselves might go with it. So I'm going to describe ways that people can make this part of their self-care regimen and use wellness with purpose, develop routines to keep themselves healthy in nature, and find it beautiful and awesome, quite literally too.
I love it. Well, and again, just a reminder to everybody, and then I'm going to let you go. I mean, in high-tech world, everybody is thrilled to have the vaccine to go, fix the pandemic. but nature's sitting there. These health benefits that you've talked about, the health challenges that are created by a deficiency in nature, and the health benefits of simply going outside, looking at a tree, walking through a park, having a plant in your house. It's so easy and so accessible. And sometimes I think we think because it's so easy that we just disregard it and don't give it the respect that it's due. But it's so, such a simple thing to do.
Creating a routine really helps. Having a purposeful routine about having coffee with your plants instead of your phone, having coffee with your dog, your pet, instead of with your phone or your TV. I mean, that's, 5 minutes in the morning where you're having coffee with nature. And then you cycle through your senses.
There's a headline: coffee with your plants.
Why not?
I love it. All right, Dr. John LaPuma, thank you so very much. The website is ecomedicine.org. You can see his blog. You can see some videos that he's been on. He's got so much to offer. So thank you. I really appreciate it. Everybody else, download the Immune, come to our YouTube, see all the other videos, and come back next Thursday for a little talk about fear. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Sarah.